My name is Rose. I am 34 years old, and once, not so long ago, I carried the bold dreams of an interior designer chasing brilliance in Paris. The city dazzled with lights that never dimmed, with boulevards that whispered of elegance, and with facades polished to perfection. Yet behind those glittering streets, I learned that shadows cling tighter than light, and that family secrets can rot quietly beneath even the most glamorous surface. I believed my path was set. I worked hard, I created spaces where people could breathe, dream, and live. But my life did not unravel because of failure or lost ambition. It was torn apart by something far more intimate, the envy of my own sister, Juliette. She was not only blood but once my confidant, the one I trusted with laughter, tears, and every fragile part of myself. To lose her trust would have been painful enough. To face her betrayal was a wound that cut deeper than I ever imagined. This story is not simply one of betrayal. It is the map of my descent into loss, and my slow climb back toward the woman I thought I had lost. It is about finding myself again amid schemes, heartbreak, and the silence left by those who turned away. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. From as far back as I can remember, my world revolved around Juliette. She was my older sister, 4 years ahead of me, and in my young, impressionable eyes, she was flawless. 38 now, she has built a reputation as a gifted photographer, but even when we were children, her talent was already being praised by relatives, neighbors, and teachers alike. I wanted nothing more than to be like her, to mirror her brilliance, to win her approval in the only ways I knew how, by copying every step she took. When Juliette returned home from international competitions clutching trophies or medals, I would run to her like an adoring shadow, throwing my arms around her waist and declaring how proud I was. I can still remember the smell of the photochemicals clinging to her clothes, the cold press of her camera against my cheek as I hugged her. In my childish innocence, I believed she would welcome my affection, that she would smile and share her victories with me. But instead, she stiffened. She would push me away as though my touch carried shame. Her eyes, deep, dark, and unsettling, flared not with joy but with an anger that stung worse than any slap. At the time, I could not make sense of it. Why would my admiration spark fury in her? The answer revealed itself with cruel clarity on my 12th birthday. Our father, a man of few words but careful gestures, handed me a gift that morning. His hands trembled slightly as he presented me with a box wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was an antique camera, an exquisite, rare piece he had spent years saving for. I had no idea then that Juliette had always coveted it, that she had whispered her desire for such a treasure into his ear long before. I only knew that when I held it, my heart leapt. Felt like a bridge to Juliette, a way I could finally walk into her world and perhaps, for once, stand beside her as an equal. But the smile that spread across her face was not the smile of a sister celebrating with me. It was sharp, dangerous, like the glint of broken glass. Before I could even lift the camera to my eye, Juliette snatched it from my hands. With deliberate cruelty, she hurled it down the staircase. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house like a gunshot. The lens exploded into fragments, scattering across the steps as if my dream itself had been torn apart. I froze, unable to breathe, while she simply stood at the top of the stairs, her lips curling into a smirk of satisfaction. Something inside me fractured that day. 12 years old, I discovered that love and admiration could be weapons turned against you. I learned that in Juliette's eyes, my existence was not an extension of her triumph, but a threat to it. From that moment forward, I vowed to lock away my successes, to protect them from her gaze. If she could not see them, she could not destroy them. For years, I lived by that rule, hiding every small achievement as though it were contraband. When I was 16, however, I could not contain the news. I had won first place in a national competition for young interior designers in France. It was the kind of victory that felt too big, too affirming to keep secret. I had designed a space inspired by the quiet corners of Paris, the places most people overlook but where real life pulses. The narrow alleys, the hidden courtyards, the weathered balconies heavy with flower pots. My work was celebrated for capturing beauty in the overlooked, for transforming shadow into form. For once, I felt the world was finally seeing me for who I was. Juliette was still living at home at that time, not yet settled in Milan. She overheard our parents whispering proudly about my win one evening over dinner. To my shock, instead of scoffing, she asked if she could attend the award ceremony with me. Her voice was sweet, almost nostalgic, as if the years of tension between us had never existed. I remember looking at her with desperate hope, wondering if perhaps she wanted to mend what had been broken. I wanted to believe that maybe she could become my ally again, the sister I had once adored. Against my better judgment, I said yes. The night of the ceremony glowed with promise. The venue was grand, filled with young designers buzzing with nerves and pride. My heart raced as I clutched the program in my sweaty hands, waiting for my name to be called. I could see Juliette sitting in the audience, her posture graceful, her expression unreadable. My parents beamed at me, their eyes filled with pride. For a fleeting second, I imagined everything would be different now, that Juliette would applaud for me, that she would reach for my hand in solidarity. But just as the announcer prepared to declare the winner, Juliette suddenly collapsed. She clutched her forehead dramatically, her body crumpling to the floor as if struck by invisible force. The room erupted in chaos. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by frantic whispers. Someone shouted for help. Within minutes, the shrill wail of an ambulance siren pierced the night air, drowning out the applause that should have been mine. All eyes turned to Juliette. I stood frozen on stage, my name hanging unspoken in the air, suffocated by her performance. The ceremony continued in disarray, but the spotlight that was meant to illuminate me had already shifted entirely to her. She was wheeled out of the hall like a tragic heroine, surrounded by a flood of concerned strangers. No one noticed that I remained there, trembling, hollowed out by disappointment. That evening taught me another painful lesson. Juliette would never allow me to shine in her presence. Her envy was not passive. It was active, relentless, and calculated. She would sabotage any moment of triumph I dared to claim, ensuring that my story always bent around hers. And though I did not yet understand the full extent of her resentment, I began to realize that my sister's love had long ago transformed into something far darker. The world outside would never know the truth. To them, Juliette was the brilliant photographer, the fragile artist with a soul too tender for this world. To me, she was the shadow at the edge of every light I tried to stand in. And at 16, I finally understood. If I ever wanted to rise, I would have to do it alone, in silence, carrying my victories like secrets locked behind closed doors. I stood there that night, powerless, as the applause meant for me dissolved into the siren's wail. My prize, my hard-earned recognition, slipped into silence as Juliette's performance swallowed the stage. That moment taught me how fragile triumph could be when envy lurked in the wings. And though I tried to bury the humiliation deep within me, its shadow followed me long after the ceremony ended. By the time I was 19, I believed I had finally carved a new path forward. The acceptance letter arrived one crisp autumn afternoon, sealed with the elegant crest of one of Paris's most prestigious academies for design. My hands trembled as I opened it, my eyes scanning the words that confirmed what I had long dreamed of. I was wanted, chosen, recognized on merit. For once, my parents rejoiced openly. They lifted the letter high like a banner of victory, snapped photos of me holding it, their faces alight with pride. I allowed myself to bask in their joy, forgetting the lesson I had once promised never to forget: never let Juliette know too much of my success. The next morning shattered everything. I awoke to the sound of chaos, the slam of doors, the sharp scrape of drawers yanked open. My parents stormed into my room, their faces twisted with panic. They grabbed my belongings with frantic hands, stuffing clothes and notebooks into trash bags as though I were being evicted. My father shouted incoherently about Juliette, his voice breaking. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she hurled my sketchbooks into the pile. And then, between sobs, they screamed the words that froze me to the floor. "Your sister has stage 3 stomach cancer." I stared at them in disbelief, my mind rejecting the absurdity of it. Only weeks earlier, I had seen Juliette's posts on Instagram, her golden hair cascading in waves, her figure glowing in photos taken at seaside cafes. Cancer? There had been no sign of sickness. Her cheeks were still flushed with health, her eyes sharp, her body vibrant. I wanted to ask them why they believed her so blindly, why no medical reports or doctors had been mentioned. But they were too consumed by grief, too desperate to rally around her tragedy to hear reason. Juliette returned home soon after, carrying herself not like a victim but like a queen restored to her throne. She draped herself across the living room couch, sighing dramatically, placing a hand on her flat stomach as if to remind us of the invisible enemy within her. "The treatments exhaust me," she would murmur, though no appointment times were ever shared. Her followers online overflowed with sympathy, sending messages of hope, flooding her posts with hearts and prayers. She reveled in it, soaking in the attention as though it were oxygen. I, however, was no longer 12 years old. I refused to be the naive girl who once allowed her joy to be smashed on the staircase. If Juliette wanted to play this game, then I would match her move for move. And so I devised my first act of defiance. One evening, I prepared her favorite dish, beef stew slow-cooked with herbs, rich with flavor. I carried the bowl to her as she reclined in feigned weakness. Her eyes widened, suspicious for an instant, but then softened. She smiled, thinking she had won me over again, that I had fallen into the role of doting younger sister. I served her generously, watching as she ate with satisfaction, certain that her performance remained unchallenged. She believed I was pacified, and that illusion was my weapon. 2 weeks later, Juliette staged her grand spectacle, a support party for a cancer patient. The irony nearly suffocated me. Our family home was transformed into a theater of sympathy. Ribbons and candles adorned the walls, tables groaned under catered food, and people streamed in carrying gifts. Not only her colleagues and acquaintances were invited, but many of my own friends from the academy. She wanted my world to witness her tragedy, and by contrast, my supposed indifference. When the speeches began, Juliette positioned herself at the center of the room, a soft scarf wrapped around her head, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she spoke of resilience, of pain, of cherishing each day as though it were the last. Guests dabbed at their eyes, their hearts breaking for the fragile heroine before them. The applause rose, warm and full of pity. I could not let the charade continue. With steady steps, I walked toward her, my heart pounding against my ribs. I wrapped my arms around her in what seemed like an embrace, leaning close as though I, too, was overcome with grief. And then, in one swift motion, I yanked the scarf from her head. Collective gasp filled the air. Her golden hair spilled free, thick and shining, no different than it had been weeks before. Silence shattered into shouts. Guests recoiled, their eyes wide, their sympathy twisting into shock. Juliette's face drained of color as she clutched at her exposed hair. Before she could spin another lie, I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play. The room filled with her voice, recorded in secret weeks earlier. Laughter bubbled from the speakers as she bragged to her friends about her plan, how she would use her cancer to draw sympathy, to sabotage me, to reclaim all attention for herself. Her words were cruel, gleeful, and unmistakably hers. Party descended into chaos. Guests shouted, some in outrage, some in confusion. Juliette's mask cracked. She bolted from the room, her hands covering her face, leaving behind a trail of whispers and betrayal. I turned to my parents expecting just once that they might see the truth. But the next morning brought only pain. My mother slapped me so hard my ears rang. "How dare you?" she screamed, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you humiliate your sister by ripping off her wig?" No explanation mattered. No video could counter what they wanted to believe. Juliette had already returned with forged medical documents, elaborate enough to convince them that I was the liar. She sobbed in their arms, shaking, while I stood accused of cruelty, of envy, of being a bully incapable of compassion. Their verdict was swift: therapy. They insisted I was unstable, consumed by jealousy. I was forced into sessions with a counselor who peered at me with skeptical eyes, waiting for me to confess that my resentment toward Juliette had driven me to madness. Week after week, I sat in that sterile room, explaining myself only to be told that denial was a symptom. My voice grew hoarse from insisting on my innocence. In the eyes of the world, I was no longer the victim of Juliette's schemes, but the perpetrator of my own. Meanwhile, Juliette flourished. She turned the house into a stage, inviting visitors under the guise of support gatherings, her every sigh punctuated by tales of my supposed coldness. To neighbors, she was the suffering saint. To my parents, she was the fragile daughter clinging to life. To me, she was a puppeteer, pulling strings that bound me tighter each day. I learned to move silently in my own home, every step scrutinized, every glance interpreted as hostility. My victories, once hidden to protect them from her, were now hidden because no one wanted to see them. In their eyes, I had already been cast in the role of villain. And though anger simmered in my chest, a deeper grief consumed me, the grief of knowing that my own family would rather believe a comforting lie than face the truth standing in front of them. After the humiliation of being branded jealous, after the sting of my mother's slap and the silence of my father's disappointment, something inside me hardened. I realized I could not rely on words alone. Arguments, protests, tears, none of it pierced the veil Juliette had woven around herself. She had mastered performance so completely that even my parents, who had once raised me with tenderness, could not see past her mask. If I wanted to survive, I would need evidence. Hard, undeniable evidence. So I began recording everything. Started small, casual photos snapped with my phone as Juliette strutted down the Champs-Élysées on the very day she claimed to be exhausted from chemotherapy. Images of her hair gleaming under shop lights, of shopping bags dangling from her wrists, of her laughter caught midair as she posed for selfies with friends. Each snapshot contradicted the story she fed our parents. Collected them obsessively, storing them on hidden drives, tucking them into encrypted folders. Then came the scraps of paper she left behind, careless in her arrogance. Grocery lists mingled with notes written in her sharp, slanted hand. Plans for exhibitions, names of curators, reminders about meetings that coincided with supposed hospital visits. And then one night, as I cleaned the dining room after one of her self-staged gatherings, I found something darker. A crumpled page, half buried beneath wine-stained napkins, where she had sketched out a strategy. Steal Rose's project. Use her designs. Submit under my name. I stared at the words until they blurred. It was proof, yes, but also a wound. For years, I had feared Juliette's envy, but to see it laid out in ink was a confirmation I hadn't wanted. She wasn't simply content to overshadow me, she intended to erase me. My worst fears came true only weeks later. One evening, I walked into my room to find shards of glass glittering on the floor. My laptop, my lifeline, my sanctuary, had been smashed. The screen hung in ruins, the body twisted, as though someone had taken a hammer to it. My heart plummeted as I realized every drawing, every painstaking design I had poured my soul into, was gone. Files, models, research, all of it obliterated in one swing of rage. Juliette stood in the doorway, arms folded loosely across her chest, her expression a portrait of innocence. She tilted her head and asked, "Didn't you back it up?" Surely someone as clever as you would have a copy? Her voice dripped with mockery. The smile that touched her lips was faint, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. The satisfaction of destruction glimmered in her eyes. I wanted to scream, to lunge at her, to demand she confess. But I bit down on my rage until my teeth ached. I said nothing because I knew the walls had ears. If I raised my voice, she would twist it. If I accused her, she would play the victim. So I gathered the fragments of my ruined laptop in silence, my hands shaking, and promised myself that I would rebuild. And I did. Day by day, I remade what had been lost, sketching late into the night, my hands blistered, my eyes raw with exhaustion. But as I rebuilt, the rumors spread faster than I could keep up. At the academy, whispers followed me down the halls. She attacked her sick sister. She can't control her jealousy. She's dangerous. I heard it from classmates, felt it in the stares of instructors who once encouraged me. My reputation, like my laptop, had been shattered. Then came the letter. A white envelope, stamped with the insignia of the academy, slid beneath my door one morning. My chest tightened as I tore it open, expecting news about my coursework. Instead, the words carved into me like blades. An investigation has been opened into allegations regarding your conduct, including harassment and aggression toward your sister. Until further notice, your enrollment status is under review. I dropped the letter, my vision swimming. I didn't need to wonder who had filed the complaint. The handwriting, the phrasing, the venom behind the words, it all reeked of Juliette. She had always been clever with disguise, but I knew her style. Months earlier, I had stumbled upon a note in her drawer, written in the same exact cadence, the same sharpness of tone. She had tried to destroy me within my own home, and now she was stretching her claws into the one place that had offered me escape. Desperation pushed me further. I needed irrefutable proof, something that even her silver tongue could not deny. So I planted recording devices around the house, small and discreet, tucked behind bookshelves and lamps, hidden beneath couch cushions. Every time Juliette entertained her friends, I held my breath and listened from my room, waiting for her to slip. And finally, she did. One evening, laughter bubbled through the walls as Juliette and her friends drank in the kitchen. My recorder captured every word. She bragged freely, her voice laced with cruelty, about smashing my laptop, about orchestrating the rumors, about crafting the anonymous complaint that had now jeopardized my future. Her words were drenched in pride, as though ruining me was her greatest art form. When I listened back to the recording, relief washed over me like a tide. I had her. At last, I had something undeniable. My parents would have to believe me now. The world would have to see her for what she truly was. But the house itself betrayed me. Days later, when I returned to retrieve the device and present it to my parents, it was gone. Every trace of it had vanished. Juliette must have found it. She always seemed to know when I was closing in. When confronted, she widened her eyes in mock hurt, shaking her head as though the mere suggestion wounded her deeply. You planted recording devices? On your own family? How sick have you become, Rose? Her performance was flawless. My parents recoiled, horrified, as though I had confessed to a crime. The one thing that could have saved me was now ammunition against me. I realized then that my survival depended not only on gathering evidence, but on protecting it with a paranoia equal to her malice. So I adapted. I stored files in encrypted folders, uploaded recordings to the cloud under layers of passwords so complex even I struggled to recall them. I hid USB drives in places Juliette would never think to look, in hollowed-out sketchbooks, beneath false bottoms of drawers, even tucked into the lining of my coat. Every secret became a war, every safeguard a lifeline. It was exhausting, living with such vigilance. I became both detective and fugitive in my own home, guarding against the one person who should have been my ally. My days blurred into a cycle of caution, always one step away from exposure. But even as fear clawed at me, a cold determination burned stronger. If Juliette wanted to erase me, she would have to work harder. For every plan she devised, I would counter with one of my own. For every lie she spun, I would find the thread that unraveled it. And though I stood alone, battered by rumor and disbelief, I swore I would not let her destroy me completely. I remember the day my Aunt Marianne walked into my apartment carrying a small leather bag filled with papers, her sharp eyes glinting with the quiet determination of someone who had seen through many masks before. She was never convinced by Juliette's fragile act, and unlike my parents, she had always kept her distance from the drama. That evening, as we spread the papers across my kitchen table, she leaned forward, scanning the so-called medical records. Within minutes, she pointed out errors that I, blinded by pain and betrayal, had overlooked: inconsistent dates, mismatched hospital stamps, and a doctor's name that did not exist in any official registry. Marianne looked at me with calm certainty and said, "Rose, the truth is already here. You just need to help others see it." Her words gave me strength I hadn't felt in months. Together, we created a file organizing every piece of evidence: the surveillance of her shopping days, the discarded notes about stealing my designs, and now the flawed medical papers. For the first time, I felt less like a victim and more like someone reclaiming her power. When Marianne suggested confronting my parents, I hesitated. My parents loved Juliette deeply and clung to the belief that she was sick and fragile. Yet Marianne reminded me that truth had a way of surfacing, whether we were ready or not. And so a family dinner was arranged. That night, Juliette performed her role with practiced ease. She touched her chest dramatically, spoke of weakness, and carefully dabbed her eyes with a napkin as if she were a tragic heroine. My parents looked on with pity, nearly forgetting why we had gathered. But Marianne, sharp as a blade, cut through the charade. "Juliette," she asked softly but firmly, "tell me, what is the name of your oncologist? I'd like to send him a thank you letter for taking such good care of you." The air froze. Juliette's fork clattered onto her plate. Her carefully painted mask cracked as panic flickered across her face. Words stumbled from her mouth, broken, unfinished. And then, without warning, she fled the table, leaving silence heavy in her wake. It was in that silence that my parents finally turned to me. I slid the organized folder across the table. They opened it, page by page, their faces shifting from confusion to disbelief and finally to grief. When Juliette returned, she was no longer the frail victim she had pretended to be. She was furious, cornered, lashing out. "You never cared about me," she screamed. "You just couldn't stand that people looked at me instead of you. I had to fight for the attention you stole from me my whole life." Her confession cut through the room like glass shattering. There were no more lies to hide behind. My parents wept openly, mourning not just her deception but the brokenness that had driven her to it. Within days, arrangements were made for Juliette to receive psychiatric treatment. It wasn't easy for anyone. My parents struggled with guilt, I wrestled with a storm of emotions, and Juliette herself resisted, fought, and denied before finally surrendering to the process. Months passed. During that time, I finished my studies, graduated with honors, and began building the career I had once feared was lost forever. Clients came, projects flourished, and for the first time I felt a stability I had never known. Meanwhile, Juliette slowly began to heal. Therapy peeled back the layers of her envy, fear, and insecurity. One afternoon, she sat across from me, her hands trembling as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Rose. Truly. I was drowning and I wanted to drag you down with me. But you didn't deserve that." It wasn't instant forgiveness. Trust takes time and wounds need space to scar. But we began again, cautiously, like two travelers on a broken bridge, meeting in the middle step by careful step. There was no guarantee of the future, but there was at least a fragile hope. 5 lessons I learned from this journey. 1. Trust your intuition. If something feels wrong, it probably is. For months, I silenced my own doubts because I wanted to preserve peace, but ignoring my instincts nearly cost me everything. Listening to yourself is not selfish, it is survival. Evidence is power. Feelings can be dismissed, but facts cannot. Collecting proof, documenting patterns, and staying methodical gave me the strength to confront lies without fear. In life, clarity comes when we ground ourselves in truth rather than emotions alone. Family love must not blind justice. We want to believe the best in those we love, but blind loyalty can destroy us. Real love is not enabling harmful behavior, it is facing the truth even when it hurts. My parents had to learn this the hardest way. For healing is possible, but it begins with accountability. Juliette's recovery didn't start until she admitted the truth. In every broken relationship, change requires honesty first. Without it, apologies are just empty words. Resilience is built, not gifted. I could have collapsed under the weight of betrayal, but each challenge forced me to stand taller. Pain does not define us, it refines us. Strength grows in the soil of struggle. Looking back, I no longer see myself only as a victim of my sister's envy. I see myself as a survivor who turned betrayal into a catalyst for growth. My story is not just about deception. It is about resilience, justice, and the quiet hope that even broken bonds can be mended. If my journey resonates with you, if you've ever faced betrayal, family conflict, or the heavy weight of doubt, remember that you are not alone. Truth, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of surfacing. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found meaning in it, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support not only helps me continue sharing, but also builds a community where honesty, resilience, and healing are valued. Together, we can remind one another that even in the darkest chapters, there is always a path toward light.